Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pause for Pedagogy, a conversation with Jane Rodriguez. My name is Lisa Endersby, and I am an educational developer at York University in Toronto, Canada, and co-editor of Pause for Pedagogy. The ILA and I are thrilled to welcome Jane to our latest conversation in the Pause for Pedagogy series. Welcome, Jane. We're happy to have you here today.
Hi, thank you. So hello, everyone. My name is Jane Rodriguez. I am currently a student engagement coordinator at California State University, San Bernardino. I'm a proud Cuban American, and I love working with Hispanic and Latinx students when it comes to leadership development and social justice.
Awesome. Thank you. And what a fabulous segue that we didn't plan. I know that there are folks who are really interested in your work and really interested in your article, so we're going to dive right in. So thinking about I guess the rationale or the reasoning, so to speak, behind this article, what key question or questions were you hoping to answer in writing this article?
Yeah, so I think the main point was helping people kind of figure out how to have these conversations focused on social justice and leadership development with students that come from marginalized identities, because I think oftentimes, and it's kind of harmful, but people assume that just because these students have a marginalized identity, that they understand what social justice is, that they understand what privilege is, what that they even understand their own identities, or even how to be an advocate for their identities or be an ally to others. So I think I wanted to provide a really foundational approach to have these conversations with these students to help them understand these issues, because I know that as myself, as a Latina, I wasn't aware about social justice or privilege or oppression until I was in graduate school, because we never had these conversations growing up. We didn't even have these conversations in college. So making sure that we're having those conversations as early as possible so that they know how to be an ally, how this impacts their leadership identity, how this impacts how they, grow and learn, and really try to come from a more foundational and education approach.
That's awesome. And I love that idea of checking our assumptions. I think that's such an important point in leadership education in general, not assuming what folks know or what they don't know, what we think they might know. And I know from doing this work that thinking about leadership in that context, and it sounds like for you too, it's particularly important in how that relates to her as people.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely.
So tell me more about the pedagogy and or the pedagogical theory you discuss in this article. So where did this idea come from and how did it inform your advising practice?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll talk a little bit more about the theories that I selected to kind of focus this activity on. The first one being the social change model, because I think it's so important for these students that are being introduced to these concepts to see how social change is at every level, that although they may be learning about it in an individual level in that space, that these students are so connected to their community as well, and knowing that social change happens in their community as well. So I think it was a way for us to encourage them, okay, take what you learned here and apply it to your communities and your surroundings as well, so you can continue this growth. And then the other theory that I focused on was the culturally relevant leadership learning, which is a theory that was created by three women that I admire so much. They were each my professors in graduate school, and they really take into consideration identities of individuals when it comes to leadership development. And I think that's so vital, especially taking into consideration how little information or research has been done on leadership identity when it comes to social identities as well. And it definitely helps to address the intersectionality of my culture and my leadership identity. So those are two theories that I think were really wonderful for this activity, and we're able to focus on the things that I needed to focus on. In regards to pedagogy, I really wanted to focus on conversation and dialogue and really creating that open space to encourage these students to have these conversations without fear of being wrong in what they were saying or even offending someone, because I feel that oftentimes that's what really holds them back from having these conversations, is that they don't want to offend someone or say the wrong things, but kind of acknowledging this is a space for you to ask those questions, say those things, and come from it to a place of understanding and wanting to learn versus affecting someone. So we had a lot of conversations about impact versus intent also, and really setting those community expectations of kind of telling both individuals, like, if someone says something that offends you, keep in mind that they're just trying to learn and they're just trying to, like, understand, versus like being offended almost. But also keep in mind to those that are asking the questions about how their words matter and like the impact that they're making in the space around them as well. So I think both like the pedagogy and the theory went hand in hand with this activity, and it really was wonderful seeing it come to life.
That's fascinating. And I know this could be its own dissertation topic or topics, and I know that I could go on for days about this. And I think the idea of grounding leadership in a growth mindset is so important. And I love that you're talking about the person behind a lot of these things and how we learn leadership. That makes a lot of sense to me. Very, very cool. So I guess thinking about learning, if I could use that segue, I know that there were probably some learning outcomes or maybe some goals that you had for this practice, your revising practice, or putting this theory into action. So what were some of the goals that you had, and did you assess whether these goals or outcomes were met?
Yeah, so I think one of our main goals was really helping these students understand their own social identities, because the students that we were interacting with, the majority of them had never heard of sexism or xenophobia or religious oppression, and really having those conversations for them to realize their own identities, and then being able to have conversations about what that means and how that impacts the world around us. So that was one of our learning outcomes, to kind of just develop an understanding around that. We also wanted them to be able to acknowledge where they held privilege and where they were marginalized, so that they can be allies to others in other spaces as well, and to be able to, I guess, advocate for those inclusive spaces now that they have a better understanding of, like, oh, these are all the identities of all of the people around me, like, let me help them and let me use my own privilege to help them. So that was another one. And then the last one was kind of to help them create a sense of pride and saliency with their own social identities and how it interacts with their own leadership development. And this one was one that was really important for me, because being at a Hispanic serving institution, surprisingly enough, like, they didn't really hold their, like, a salient identity to that of, like, being a Hispanic or Latinx student. And I feared that oftentimes that was associated with imposter syndrome as well. So I really wanted them to see how awesome it was to be so, like have so many different identities, and how that played a role in how they are as leaders. So those were the three things that we focused on throughout the activity. And in regards to assessment, we didn't conduct any formal assessment processes, but we were able to observe, and just like by interacting with students, they were able to get a lot from the activity. And I know I mentioned it in the article that one of the implications was that we didn't have enough time. And that was basically because students were coming up to us saying, like, are we done? Like, can we keep going? Like, we want to continue having these conversations. So that in itself, to me, showed that it was successful, that these students wanted to continue having these conversations because they were learning and growing with those around them. So that was kind of how we measured it.
That's such important data, though, right? I mean, the fact that students want to engage in things like you were alluding to that are hard, that are difficult, that may be challenging. I know it's hard for me to engage when I'm going through imposter syndrome. So the fact that these students still feel uncomfortable or challenged or whatever the case is, that you've created a space where, in spite of that, they're still engaging. That's a big deal. And that's really important, I think, if we want that identity development piece to go in any way, right? I like that idea of being comfortable with being uncomfortable, I guess, right? As cliche.
Yes, definitely.
Very cool. So it sounds like, as much as you've done some really great work already, there's still a lot more to do and a lot more that you're interested in, excited about. So where do you see future research or writing headed in this area? What do you think you'll be writing about next?
Yeah, definitely. So I very much want to focus on the Hispanic Latinx population, just because it's an identity that is super salient to me. And surprisingly enough, it wasn't salient to me until I left my environment, because I grew up in Miami, Florida, and I was constantly surrounded by Hispanic and Latinx individuals. And I called it my unicorn world, because we just weren't aware of these social identities because we were part of the majority there, right? So once I left to grad school and I was part of the minority, that's when I was like, oh wow, like this identity is so important to me. So I definitely want to continue working with Hispanic and Latinx students and doing research on how culture plays a role with leadership identity. That's something that I'm really passionate about, and kind of acknowledging the nuances of being a Latina, and the commonalities that so many of us face, whether that is, you know, being first generation students, or being scared of talking because we fear that we're talking with an accent, or like having those different conversations, and like just telling people that it's okay to have these identities. So that's kind of where I want my focus to be on, is Hispanic Latinx students and their leadership development, and how their culture and family and community plays a role in that.
That's awesome, and such an important topic too. And I love that you're digging into this idea of identity. And we can probably talk when this isn't recording about the myriad of ways that I've been looking at identity too. And I'm not saying that to take away from anything that you're doing, but I'm just so excited for other people who are interested in this, because that notion of leadership identity, or just identity, is so wrapped up in this concept of social justice. So I love that there are folks like who are really digging into this and not just looking at it theoretically, but thinking about the people behind the articles that we read and the studies that are happening. That's amazing. Well, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for sharing more about your work, both what you've done in the past and what's upcoming. I know that we have a lot of exciting things to look forward to from you. Anything else that you wanted to share with us before we close today?
Nope, I'm all good. Thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful.
Awesome. Thanks, Jane. Well, Pause for Pedagogy is an initiative of the Leadership Education Member Interest Group of the International Leadership Association. All of our articles and videos are available at www.ila-net.org, and you can follow us on Twitter at @the_ILA. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you again soon.